All right, welcome. I can't believe that the tech worked that smooth and that easily. In fact, I don't think that's ever happened before. I've got my Manuka honey coffee. So hopefully we won't be caught by any throat aids and coughing fits. By the way, a coughing fit is not what Dracula has when he has a temper tantrum. That's a coughing fit. A coughing fit is when I start coughing. And it is the pollen in the air of this region. But thank you to all the online chat doctors who diagnose me on a never-ending basis. I'm drinking my double shot of espresso, and separately as a beverage goblin, I've also got my goblet of effervescent evanescence. Save me from the nothing I've become. Wake me up inside. Can't wake up. Save me. And no, I don't like that song. The only songs I like are Juggalo songs. By the way, we got a couple new items over here. Check this out. Watch this. You ready? Got rid of that stupid zombie. Got a dollar sign up there. Storm the Cat says for $10. I noticed that the Hatman looks like Saturn. I wonder if there's a connection between him and Moloch. I mentioned this on Coattail, but he wasn't aware of the Hatman. The Hatman is an entity that people believe they see or appear to see or see. Particularly when they do extremely high doses of Benadryl, which is completely stupid. But there are idiots who will do anything like that because the internet has threads talking about doing that. And they get the idea to take these ridiculously high doses of Benadryl, which is the dumbest thing ever. And the people that get close enough to the edge of doom, we'll say, when they do this, they see this man, and there's a bunch of people that record this. So it's supposedly not a single person. It's like multiple people's accounts of the Hatman. And that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. But the question came in. And it seems to quite obviously be a demon or something akin to that, right? It's this thing. They see this figure over here creeping. They see this pervy little figure over here, this little pervy man creeping on them, looking in, peeping in the window. And there we go. Got me a nice little smooth house beat for them super chats. You know what I'm talking about? It's not really a house beat. I don't know what it is. It's more like a chill trance beat going. Anyway, so I like this is a funny t-shirt here. I can't take Benadryl because I owe the Hatman money. I don't want to see him. So my obvious assessment was that this is obviously some type of demonic entity. And I wonder if certain demonic entities are unique to certain substances. I don't know. Just kind of a suspicion. A speculation. But that's what I was referring to with the Hatman. Now, somebody said, is there a reference to Saturn? Well, could just be an entity or a demon or an angel of death that appears. But also, as I was on one of the Psychedelic Bros interviews last night, we had a good interview. He was asking questions about orthodoxy. His name's Float Universe. He's got a pretty decent sized Instagram page. We did an interview last night. He'll post that today, I imagine. And we got into this topic, and my assessment, my theory is that people in different cultures, in terms of the religious programming that they're raised with, they will see the entities, if they're in a drug trance or if they're whatever, according to their cultural programming, shall we say. So in other words, they'll see, if they've been raised to think that lizards are the manifestation of the evil god, then they will see demons as lizard men, right? So it's culturally relative in the sense that the appearance of the entity will be relative to that culture. It's a demon still, but demons can wear different masks, right? So they might appear to another tribe under the mask of the moon god or whatever. But it's still the same entity behind the manifestation. So it's entirely possible then that the Hatman, who appears to the people who are on the brink of doom, shall we say, of the very high doses of that, could be one of these types of entities, obviously a demon. Nobody describes the encounter with Hatman as anything positive. It's a feeling of dread, terror, fear. It's a demon. It's obvious, dude. It's not even like, duh. So, I'm having fun with this new super chat here. Let's try this one. We'll get another one. Low pan. Yo pan, low pan.
Miss Abatan. We did not contact you, Miss Abatan, to...
What does he say? I'm trying to think of I forgot Low Pan's lines. You were not called upon to get it.
You were not called upon to get it, Miss Abatan.
Yeah. I know, no, I'm sorry. Lopan says, if you haven't looked at the book, Trilateral Commission and Global Governance, 1972 to 1982 by Routledge Press. Interesting. I did just get the Routledge official publication on the history of Tavistock. I did not know that there was a Dino Knudsen PhD thesis printed by Routledge Publishers, which is academic publishing. I will definitely get that. Thank you for that reminder there. And that reminds me, I forgot. This doozy also arrived, which came in a big old giant version. I didn't know I was going to get the blind boomer edition of the Fabian Freeway. So this is a classic too, and it will actually be relevant to today's global elite text from Jacques Attali. But this is, of course, the classic, famous History on the Fabian Society by Rose Martin. And it's going to be relevant because, believe it or not, Jacques will bring it up. Not that book, but he will bring up some of the key Fabian developments. Now, for those who are also curious as to what I'm wearing, shout out to my mom. She chose the coolest t-shirt I've seen in a long time. I'm out of bubble gum. So she got me an awesome They Live Rowdy Roddy Piper t-shirt. That's awesome. A John Carpenter shirt. Oh yeah. Also, shout out to those who are the small audience over on Twitch, but I'm always happy to expand the streaming to wherever we can. And to X Twitter. I can't believe this worked. I spent the whole morning making sure that I could multi-stream. And of course, there's a lot of means and ways to do this. Most people do it with StreamYard. I've still not used StreamYard. I'm really wedded to... What happens is you get really used to the tech that you've been using. And so I'm really wedded to and used to what I'm using. So I don't feel like the whole ordeal of going through transitioning over to StreamYard. And shout out to Streamlabs because they've actually been making it a lot better. Now that they have collab cam, I don't have to use stupid ass Zoom anymore. And now that they have the multi-stream function, I don't have to go full with frickin' StreamYard or Restream, whatever. So it's good. It's good. When they initially released collab cam, it didn't work. But Streamlabs has really upped their game, and it's working great for me now. The only problem is that I can't yet have a guest and play a video. So that's the one big advantage that StreamYard has that I think eventually maybe Streamlabs will fix. But I really am a fan of Streamlabs. In fact, I got a message saying that last year I was in the top percentage earners on Streamlabs. So shout out to the audience because you guys were the source of that. So I was up there at the top of Streamlabs last year. By the way, you can support via heading over to the Streamlabs link right there in the chat there or in the show description. You can send a super chat at any time via Streamlabs. You just click that link and it pulls up the Streamlabs page. You put in your question, send whatever amount, and it will pop up on the screen. And I've gotten rid of that stupid ass zombie gif. And now we got our dang... It needs to be... I wanted a Bitcoin sign instead of $1, but whatever. And we got some smooth, chill house music. Travis sends $10 and he says, "Let's go, baby." Thank you so much. Anonymous. Got the rave going in here. $3. JJJ, please do more streams on TikTok. By the way, you can integrate TikTok, it looks like. So I might try to do that. Problem is, every time I try to integrate and do these types of things on TikTok, everything gets banned. So you can get away with religious debates pretty easily on there. But everybody on there is just such idiots, man. It's like the dumbest people out there on TikTok. It's so trying. Do more TikTok streams on internal monologues or the Tusami guy. I follow that dude. He followed me back too. I'll try to find that. Would you debate Malpassing in? Maybe. I don't know. We got a debate coming up in 2 days with the Ayn Rand Institute or something. The Ayn Rand Institute's philosopher of transhumanism or whatever. I was not familiar with this person. Yaron Brooks. And we will be debating this weekend over on the large Vegas Red Pill channel of our friend Jake Rattlesnake. So Jake's a cool dude. He's had Rachel on. I'm going to be over there on Jake's channel eventually doing an interview as well. And he's going to be moderating the debate between me and the Ayn Rand Institute dude. So that should be fun. He is an academic. I think he has a degree. I'm not sure what his degree is in, but should be a fun debate. The premise is, can society be governed by science and reason alone? And is transhumanism a good thing or what? Something like that. All right. Thank you for those super chats again. Support the stream via super chats. I'm so happy to get back to the Global Elite book series because, you know, that's kind of in many ways. We got a few bread and butters over here.
Well, I like bread and butter. I like toast and jam. That's what baby feeds me. I'm a loving man.
For some reason in high school when we would smoke green things, I thought that was the funniest song ever. I don't know why. Me and my buddy Ben, we thought that was super funny. Like 9th grade, dude. I'm talking 9th grade, okay? I'm not talking senior year. I don't know why. That is a ridiculous song, though. And we got a few bread and butters, right? We got Hollywood. We got esoteric Hollywood. Head on over to Jay's analysis in the shop. You see the link right there, right? And in the shop, you get signed copies of Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2, the classics. You can also get the meta narratives over there. You can also get the Big Fat Red book, which I'm not right now sold out of, so those are on order, back order. You get signed copies in the shop. Anyway, our bread and butter is not just Hollywood. It's also doing goofy things now. We've integrated so-called comedy. And if you come to our live event, you will see some of that so-called comedy live at an event where they have so-called comedy with me, my event, and Jamie's event. There's a lot of impressions, a lot of absurdities. It is not the same as last year's. Last year, if you don't know, my live events included me having a debate with a Funko Pop. That was the live event. And I won every debate by smashing the Funko Pop Gallagher style. So those who were fortunate enough to see those live events got to see all that live at an event. But we will be live in Las Vegas. If you click in the show description, or if you're on my Twitter or whatever, you can click at the top, pinned, the Eventbrite link to get tickets. It's me, it's Jamie Hanshaw, it's Isaac Weishaupt doing an entire talk on Eyes Wide Shut. He's going to have merch. He's going to have all his shiznits there. We got Made by Jim Bob coming now, also doing a presentation. It's a mystery presentation. I don't know what Jim Bob's going to do. He's going to do some fun, goofy stuff. And Jim Bob can sing. Jim Gob, that's a dude that shows up that mimics and mocks Jim Bob. There's Jim Bob and there's Jim Gob, and that's like his ripoff dude, who's like his foil. I just made that up. Jim Bob can sing, dance. He does Vegas showgirl stuff. I mean, he does it all. Okay. So get your tickets right now. June 22nd. That's what, 2 weeks from now. You barely got 2 weeks. Head on over there, get those tickets, and I just might forgive you. Okay, now you guys know one of the classics, that other bread and butter, is the Global Elite book series, and we've done many of these. I really want to do Changing Images of Man, but it's just so you can't find a physical copy of it. Now, I think the last Global Elite book series that we were touching on and tackling was, actually, we could include sex espionage in that. Even though it's not written by a global elite man, it's written by just a normal historian. We finished this last night, and the part 2 went out to all the subscribers. So, yes, I did finally finish this. I know it took a while. So if you're over on Rockfin, it's right here. Part 2 just went up. And we delved deep into the history of how the elites control us through these types of operations. We will also do the second analysis of this classic, which is the same topic, but much more recent, with Jeff Stein McGeffrey. And prior to those, the last Global Elite text that we'd done was something in the vein of really a continuation to Quigley, which was the Johann Ratio book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, hence why Fabian Freeway will fit very well with those texts. Now, we mentioned that Jacques Attali is an important figure in the previous talk where we covered his book, Brief History of the Future. That was one of our early Global Elite text lectures in this series, which is a never-ending series. There's always more writings of the elite to analyze, to decode, and to display before this lovely audience. By the way, if you would like and share, where is everybody? What? There's nothing else to do. You need to be here doing this. Okay, we need to be understanding how the system operates. So you better get your butt over here, sit down, get out your pen and paper, take notes. This is the first half of a lecture. Somebody said the other day, do Jacques Attali's first American translated globalist book called Millennium. And I was like, ooh, that sounds interesting. Well, I went and looked it up, and it's a very readable, accessible little text. And what do we know? We got another global elite man up here giving a blurb. Alvin Toffler. It's an unsettling, exhilarating, scintillating work. Attali is always there to teach us with crackling creative intelligence. Crackling? How does creative intelligence crackle? I don't know what that means, but it's an odd choice of words. But and then we got Arthur Schlesinger. Attali's Millennium is a fertile speculation of the things to come. And it's called, in its subtitle, Winners and Losers. Looters. That's more accurate, right? IMF looters. Winners and IMF looters in the coming world order. Now, wait a minute. Remember, for decades, there was no such thing as that. There ain't no NWO. And yet, the global elite people were writing books about the coming of, what does that say? Oh, I don't know what that meant. I don't know what that means. It doesn't exist. Even though I see it in front of my face, it must not exist because the authority system and the authority structure that exists has told me it doesn't exist. Even though I'm reading right here that it does exist right in front of my face. But now this book came out in 1991. So we are, 15 years prior to the famous Brief History of the Future book that we reviewed many years ago, 6-7 years ago, when we were beginning this series. Of course, this series began with Dr. Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope. We did Anglo-American Establishment. Soon after, we did Marilyn Ferguson's Aquarian Conspiracy, which is not a conspiracy book. Then we did Jacques Attali's Brief History of the Future from 2006. Well, it turns out Jacques, who again is the Kissinger of France, Jacques Attali, Jacques, a monkey, a machine. The Kissinger of France wrote an earlier book way ahead in its predictions. In fact, if you recall, he made the prediction of nomadic devices, which he said these devices of the future would allow us to be cut off, deracinated from our traditional structures of family, nation state, etc. And Attali was absolutely correct. He said the effect of consumerism would be, as it was mass-produced, these devices, laptops, TVs, and especially these, would allow us to become more mobile and no longer be attached to the things that formerly rooted us as human beings. Hence, he titled them nomadic devices. Now, I didn't know that he hadn't just said that in 2006. He said it in his 1991 book, Millennium. Wow. So even more ahead of the curve than we expected. And there's some interesting artwork. I don't know who chose the artwork. If you publish a book, typically, right, it's not the author that chooses the artwork. So a lot of times people have these conspiracies and these, oh, why did you put this on the cover of your book? Dude, I didn't choose the cover of my book. Okay, and most people who have a publisher, they don't get to choose the cover of their book. I had nothing to do with the cover of this book at all. That's what publishers and editors do. For Attali, though, there is this bizarre, I can't even read this, it's so small. It looks like the months or is it maybe I think it's the months. 12, it's 12. So he's got these weird drawings and look like etchings and woodcuts. Right. Now remember, Attali was the Kissinger to Francois Mitterrand. Okay, so we're talking about the power behind the throne, so to speak. Again, the Kissinger of France. And he is identified as that by Toffler in the foreword. Okay, so that's not conspiracy theorizing. It's actually right here. He says, Attali, now this is 1991. Attali is not known in America. America's too provincial. Oh yeah, we're not sophisticated and European. In fact, it was Jacques Attali who accompanied François Mitterrand in the global meetings with Gorbachev. And it was because of this Kissinger of France role that Toffler says Attali was placed as the head of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And he says that he is there to help Eastern Europe undergo the painful transition from a centrally planned Soviet economy to a market-based one. However, he's not well known in America because Americans are provincial. He says that Attali is a force of intellect, and his interests and his analyses are broad and wide-ranging. In fact, Toffler says he wrote a fascinating treatise on the connection between politics and the economics of music. How does music relate to political culture? Well, you're gonna find and you're gonna see some interesting comments from Attali, which I think help us to understand why. In fact, you will even see a couple esoteric references from Attali, which makes sense given what we read in Brief Hits to the Future, where he talks about the global brain when we're all linked in our minds to the web, which he calls the golem. And he says that, in fact, Attali could be the head of a bank which could become a new pillar of the global order. Now, this is right at the beginning of the public announcement of the EU. Right? When was the EU publicly announced? Wasn't it like early 90s? EU. Now, we know from our writings in our 93. Okay, so this is 2 years before the public announcement of the EU. However, the EU was already planned by the OSS and the post-World War II powers in the 40s and 50s. And in fact, we know that that was the case through what's called the European Project. And we went into great detail in Ratu's excellent geopolitical absolute masterpiece, Necessary Work, the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. And he's got an entire chapter dedicated to all the goons and goblins behind the European Project and essentially the Fabian socialists who were the architects of it. And yet again, here we have something that is not new in the 1990s, but even in this book, they're essentially saying that he might be the head of the biggest bank going forward. Of course, that didn't actually materialize because there's two areas of this book's thesis which ended up being wrong. So notice that the global elites, when they write these kinds of books, they don't always get everything right. They project things into the future. They have theories, plans, analysis, actuaries, etc. And they're not always 100% correct. And we're going to notice two key points where Attali got things wrong, but we're also going to see a lot of places where he got things really correct. Jordan Flores says, can you write a book on how to win an argument against my wife? No, because no one can win an argument against your wife. Stephen Bissett, do you have a problem? Why are you even here? If you don't like what you're seeing here, you can just leave, dude. Get out of here. Interesting. Again, the woodcuts. I don't know what the woodcuts mean. It's another bizarre woodcut of, like, almost look kind of alchemical. This is like an angel man handing a book, and then an angel above the angel who's blessing the people. I can't tell what this means. You can figure out what this means, but so Attali begins by saying that, well, we're entering a new era because the Berlin Wall has fallen. So this book is written right around that time. It's just fallen, and he says Toffler's future shock, that's old news. Change is the only constant. That's not actually true. In fact, if change is the only constant, you couldn't say change is the only constant because the proposition itself would be self-refuting and would no longer be true. So if change is the only constant, Yeah, thank you, by the way. We got 800 people on X. That's cool. You guys would hit like and share. We got 400 over here on YouTube. That's nice. Attali says that history is accelerating. The Berlin Wall has fallen. Now we're in a new order, an NWO. So, key elements here that will be admitted is that it's almost like, as Attali will point out later, he says that the balance of powers in the world during the Cold War were two pillars with a pyramid in the middle. Yes, he says this. I kid you not. He says the two pillars are USSR and USSA, and then the pyramid in the middle. And he says that now that the Cold War has come to an end, the Berlin Wall has fallen, the Soviet Union is collapsing, he says that this pillar over here of the USSR is gone. Now we have, and he says the pyramid, by the way, is the US with the dollar at the top. So the end of the USSR removes the balance of power, so to speak, to the new liberal open market order of pluralism. But before we get to all that, fascinating statement at the very beginning of the book I did not expect. Attali says, you might think that if you want to understand today's world, you would want to read classics of economics and geopolitics like Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations or Karl Marx's Das Kapital. And why, yes, wouldn't every sophisticated nerd man, geopolitical nerd man, I read all the books, Karl Marx, and he says, those aren't even as relevant as Blade Runner. Yes, you heard me right. Jacques Attali says Blade Runner is more relevant today than Das Kapital or Wealth of Nations. Look at that. Interesting. It's almost like he's thinking esoteric Hollywood was, like he's thinking in this kind of way, yeah. Exactly. By the way, shout out to those super chatters. I love my new sounds here. Look at this. There we go. He says Blade Runner is going to be more accurate because the future that we're going into will be technocratic. 1991, y'all. This wasn't written in 2024. So again, a lot of things he's going to get right, particularly with tech predictions. And in fact, believe it or not, Jacques Attali is actually going to get quite a few geopolitical things and analyses correct. The question, though, is that, and critiques, he's going to get some really accurate critiques, believe it or not. I was surprised. That does not mean his answers are correct. Now, he says that, look, if the U.S. is going to go into the future, if it's going to be the center of global power in the future, he says it's going to have to transform. And one of the things it's going to have to transform is that money will have to move at the speed of the future. And he doesn't know if the dollar and these kinds of things are going to be able to move at the speed that globalization will require. That's fascinating because he wasn't even thinking of Bitcoin. He wasn't even thinking of cryptocurrencies. And of course, it's Silicon Valley, America. It's the West that develops Bitcoin. And by the way, Bitcoin will actually answer a lot of the things that Attali brings up as problems. So again, 1991, he didn't have any knowledge of this. He says that the future people will be severed from any national alliance by the microchip gadgets that they have. These nomadic devices will make some people into rich nomads. They will be able to participate in a global liberal market culture through economic choice. They will be able to roam the planet seeking ways to use their free time. Not everybody will participate in this, however. There will be many in the future who become obsolete. Their functions are obsolete. There will be beggars of the future, the poor nomads, boat people on a planetary scale, plying the planet searching for sustenance and shelter. It's almost as if they planned global upheaval to move the populations and to make them into nomads in order to have the end of the nation state. In other words, the open market liberal order post-Soviet Union is the means by which there will be the transformation away from the nation state. And he says that you can read Alvin Toffler about this. And he says, I'm saying basically the same thing. Like past civilizations, they sought order to ward off the threat of nature and other warring tribes and men. This coming new order of the future will be based on the ability to manage violence. Unlike previous orders, however, they were ruled by religion in the past, then it transitioned to military force. The new order of the future will manage all violence largely by economic control. In other words, microchips, devices, etc. And if we want to avoid that, CBDC, UBI, etc., we're going to need to have the means in this electronic age of opposing the electronic centralized control. This is the only one that does that. Bitcoin. It's decentralized. And by the way, are you having a good week? Many of us are having good weeks. In 5 days, Bitcoin is up 5%. Now, okay, guys, clicking the button. What did Ivan say? There's a good chance that we pop to 80 or 90. Okay, 70 was a big key resistance point. If we can edge above 70, there's a good chance of popping to 80 or 90. Not guaranteed, but again, we know we're going to 150 eventually. Okay, it might be this year, it might be next year, who knows? But look, I just heard today that the pension funds, the boomer pension funds, are now looking for Bitcoin exposure. Anyway, if you do, by the way, want to get started with Bitcoin, if you're looking for an outlet to just custody Bitcoin and buy Bitcoin, then I recommend Swan Bitcoin. And here is the promo code where you can head over to Swan Bitcoin and get started by just buying and custodying Bitcoin. And remember, I had no idea what was in this book, but a lot of what Attali brings up will actually be totally relevant to what Bitcoin is. And I think countries that align themselves with this, the future of real money, those are going to be the ones that are prosperous and powerful. Now, Attali moves on to say that in the close of the Saddam Hussein situation there in the early 90s there, or he says that the USA is expanding itself into too many foreign interventions and wars. By the way, no, people always ask me this. There's a different Jay Dyer. That is not me that wrote the Bitcoin book. Even though I'm a big supporter of Bitcoin, I don't know who wrote that book. I have no idea. I assume it's a real person. I don't think it was somebody just stealing my name. Anyway, I don't know what you mean. Swan doesn't accept $50 a month purchases. I think they do. I mean, on the app, it's like you can put in any amount a month you want. I think. Let me look and see. So let's see, recurring buy $50 a week. Let's see if you can add a different amount. Edit it. Maybe you have to do it at every. Maybe you have to do it every week and not a month. I don't know. I mean, $50 a month, dude. Come on, you gotta. I would do more than that. That's like $50 a month. Anyway. By the way, so thank you for the support. If you're on X, these links are. I don't have these links on X, so I don't know. You can get these links over on YouTube. Now, let's see, where are we at? Here we go. Back to Attali. Attali says because of all the expansion into foreign interventions, like all previous empires, America will exhaust itself. I think this is a very plausible critique. And here we are, 30-ish years later, and this does seem to be correct. 900 on X, that's awesome. So Attali is correct that in comparing the U.S. to, he says, Spain. This is fascinating. He says, if you look at the history of the Spanish Empire and its fall, he cites a historian named Paul Kennedy, the rise and fall of great powers. He says that once Spain in 1634 decided to get involved in the conflicts of the 30 Years' War, this essentially exhausted them. Spanish monarchy was sagging under massive debts and its inefficient industries. This eventually led to the bankruptcy, the declaration of bankruptcy in the 1640s by the Spanish king, and the full decline of the Spanish Empire. He says that if you compare the U.S. troop movements, this is in the early 90s, by the way. Remember, this is the 90s. Saudi Arabia, Persian Gulf conflict, Iraq, blah, blah, blah. This is key. Now, here's where Attali is really correct. Okay, so note, he's going to get some things very wrong. But this first couple chapters of this book actually surprised me. I mean, he was, particularly the first chapter. This first chapter is like really accurate. And he's accurate from analyzing the problems. He's doing a critique of consumerism. All this stuff's great. Does not mean his answers are great. His answers are terrible. But first chapter is actually really spot on. And basically everything we would say. Now he says, like Spain, the United States is not the first great power to become mired in massive debt. As it retains global responsibilities, America has overextended its debt, and this will become a symptom of fatal imbalance before its eventual demise. The U.S. debt crisis cannot ultimately be solved by kicking the can down the road, etc., and more debt. He says that it is more evident that the central organizing principle of the future, whatever happens to be at the margins, will be economic. This will become apparent as we get closer to the year 2000. The rule of military might be characterized by the Cold War. It's being replaced by the reign of markets. The liberal ideas, the open market, the democracy, the liberal market, etc., have defeated the chief rival of communism. To be sure, however, the conundrum remains. How will we balance this economic growth with social justice? So in the 90s, 1991, he's already predicting and talking about social justice will be the buzzword of the future. How do we fix the social justice caused by economic disparities? And again, this is like a weird left idea that's totally debunked. I think it should be, even though people still believe this. People think that the reason that there's crime and the reason that people act bad is because of social inequalities. Like as if we had equality, there wouldn't be crime. No, crime happens because humans are fallen and they choose vice. That's why, over virtue. So the left, they typically will, classic progressives, even today, the left, whatever, they mistake the symptoms for the causes. So the reason that we have crime and all this crazy stuff is not inequality. Those are manifestations of fallen human beings choosing evil. But remember, the left can't admit that there's such a thing as evil because that would undo the whole progressivist paradigm. Attali says that the West, America, is particularly transitioning away from an industrial economy to a service economy. That's correct. And in fact, if we recall the analysis of one of the other global elite texts, Alex Abea's RAND Corporation book, Soldiers of Reason, that we did analysis of, Abea actually says that the RAND Corporation was the brains behind that transition. So this was actually a planned thing. It wasn't accidental to transition America into a service economy away from an industrial economy. It was done by design. There's a discussion by him of the dialectical clash of East and West in the Cold War, perhaps leading to a fall of both into a new world order. That didn't end up happening. Instead, we got the victory of Western liberal democratic capitalism, whatever the heck that is. But he says that the real focus of the future won't even be that stuff. It's going to be microchips, biotech, and GMOs. Again, way ahead of his time with that one. He says that we're emerging into a new hyper-industrial order. So he, just like Klaus and Davos' crew, right? Fourth Industrial Revolution. He's talking about the same thing as Klaus there. Inequality will cleave to this new world, ORDER, just as the Berlin Wall once divided East and West. He says that, so in the future, there's still going to be a cleavage of inequality, but it won't be geographical East and West of the Berlin Wall. It'll be super elites with money versus the masses of those that don't have money. How do we determine who will be the super elite with money? It will be whoever has controlling interests in whatever the money of the future is essentially what he says. He doesn't say that in explicit terms because, again, he doesn't know what Bitcoin is. But if you believe in Bitcoin, then that's what he's looking for, right? Like the pagans in Acts 17, groping in the dark. He doesn't know. But he's like, whatever in the future ends up being the solution to money and money power will be that. Now, I have this analogy I came up with that was fitting, I think. And I love that scene in the new Dune, right? Dune 2, where they're trying to figure out how they're going to beat Shaddam the Fourth and the Harkonnens. And Gurney and Paul are like, well, of course, we do have that giant stash of the Atreides family warheads. And the Fremen are all like, the what? The heck is that? Now, in the future, which is already beginning to emerge, if you want your version of the inheritance of the Atreides family money warheads, how many BTC do you have? That's what I'm talking about. Do you see my analogy? That's going to be the thing of the future, right? Do you understand it's difficult already to become a whole coiner? How much more difficult will it be to become a whole coiner when it's $500,000 per Bitcoin? What about when it hits $1 million a Bitcoin? What about when it hits $10 million per Bitcoin 15, 20 years from now? Now, of course, true, the dollar is devalued. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it has the same purchasing power per se, but it just depends. You're not going to stop this. This is the money of the future. And people still haven't figured it out yet. And don't listen to the dummies in the chat. I have no idea what it is and what. It ain't real. I can't touch it. Yeah, can you touch the app on your phone for your bank? No. Do you see the money when you transfer it on Zelle? Do you touch it? No. So enough of these low tier boomer arguments. Now, back to Attali. How many Atreides nuclear economic warheads do you have? The revolutions. Here's a color revolution I forgot about. He says that we've just seen the success, apparently, of Europe's remarkable Velvet Revolution. So this was the CIA's color revolution in Czechoslovakia, known as the Velvet Revolution. This is one a color revolution I totally forgot. This led to the opening up of the economy there to a market economy. And then he says that future successful color revolutions might occur. Some of them did. Of course, in Ukraine, it was the Orange Revolution. By the way, that doesn't mean we want to go back to some Soviet thing. It just means that, amazingly, Attali cashes this out like it's a dialectical conflict between East and West, Soviet versus Western capitalist. And to those who are of the higher order of this kind of international stuff, they seem to kind of have this spoken/unspoken secret that it doesn't really matter which thing emerged out of the Cold War. Either of these systems will be the placeholder, or it will be the phase before we go to the full-on NWO. So if the Soviets had ended up winning in that experiment, then we would have had a Soviet-dominated technocracy. That's why we saw a lot of H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, right? Early on, they were saying, hey, the Soviet experiment is running wonderfully. Maybe that's the model of the future technocratic governance, right? That's why Russell says that it's Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Did you ever know? Did you even know the USSR, Socialist Republic? There is an even more ominous and less visible threat on the horizon. It has to do with the very warp and woof of the NWO. Its liberal ideology of consumerism and pluralism. The essence of both democracy and the market is choice. But what happens when choice is not given and available to all people? He says that the system might begin to crack when it's realized that there's not actually choice. And he says that really the whole system is grounded on a nihilistic indifference and the cult of immediacy, which is, I thought was interesting. That's true. I agree. There is a cult of immediacy, which is what technology provides, this convenience. And it's great to have that efficiency and that convenience. However, there's a trade-off, because when you trade off everything for convenience and immediacy, oftentimes we're actually trading off a lot of good things too. So we're trading our privacy nowadays for a lot of convenience and immediacy. We're trading local business for the convenience and immediacy of Jeffrey Bezos and his drone army that's going to bring the packages, right? Rather than driving to the local business to buy these things so that we can save $1 and give the oligarchs of Silicon Valley more and more power and control. And he says, all of this might collapse into a possible nihilistic revolt. Interesting. He doesn't say exactly who would revolt, but I think he thinks maybe the poorer classes. But of course, if they revolt, right, they're not going to revolt against the actual people in control. They're going to revolt against people that they are duped into revolting against, like the local business owner who makes $200,000 a year. As if that's the person who's like, the elite. Okay, no, that's not the elite, dummy. That's who employs and gives jobs to people in the local community. Amazingly, he says the culture of choice must not be allowed to embrace processes that would transform life itself through tinkering with human DNA and destroying the genetic heritage of the human race, the diverse genetic heritage. Well, that's fascinating. So Jacques Attali almost sounds like he's warning against transhumanism and genetic manipulation, and that's quite a change from what he's pushing in 2006. So he's a lot more cautious and, dare we say, almost traditional in ways in this 1991 book versus his 2006 book, which says that transhumanism is the tip of the spear of the NWO. He cites, of all people, well, let me rephrase this. He says that we can never allow the biological limitations or borders to be overrun or destroyed. The great paradox of global consumer democracy is that the rights to pleasure and happiness might be a toxic elixir we are forcing our children to drink. Amazing. Wow, that sounds like us. Because this is the point we make oftentimes to libertarians when we're debating. From whence do you derive these ideas of rights? Perhaps there are rights. But on what grounds and in your system, what's the justification for rights, especially since many of you are low-tier Reddit-level atheists. Where, in any sense at all, do you imagine that there's a right if we are matter in motion? This is fiction. Where do we get rights to choice and pleasure and consumption? Well, these are just assumed. Attali says we're going to have a new definition of the sacred. Well, I agree. Like, it seems like modern society has actually divested itself from the sacred. Attali notices that. But of course, there's no such thing as inventing a new definition of it. You can't invent new definitions. It'll just be made up. So Attali's secular, sort of materialist approach, pragmatic approach to these questions is not going to get us anywhere. I mean, to be honest with you, this first chapter, it sounds like Jordan Peterson. I mean, you got some interesting insights. I wouldn't say it's as right-wing as, quote-unquote right-wing as Jordan Peterson, but it sounds like a chapter that Jordan Peterson could write. And then he says, look, let's go back to history and see if we can do some archaeology of ideas to find some historical forms and structures. Now, this chapter, again, was actually fairly fascinating. It's a great insight into the mind of the global elite about how they view things. And in every global elite text, almost all of them, right, we get the same process, right? We have to do the same thing where we have to go through the history, and really what it ends up being is the global elite storytelling, right? We need the history lesson from them, and then they give us the storytelling, which allows them to then posit that their version of where we're going in the NWO is the only rational one to go into. He says history tells us that man has these sort of stages and there's these sort of phases. And he says that we're going to look at social forms and the myths that cultures utilize to create social cohesion. And he says the first thing that happens is that they invent and make up hierarchy. I would say that's true, right, from a historical perspective. I mean, I don't think all hierarchy is invented, but there is a sense in which hierarchy is natural, is what we're saying, right? And this, again, sounds kind of like, I think you could say he's probably read Foucault. I mean, he's probably read a lot, Toynbee, Foucault, Outlines of History, H.G. Wells. I'm sure he's read all these people to kind of put together this journey. Probably Comte, right? Auguste Comte has the same idea of like progressing civilizations and ages of man. It's kind of arbitrary, but he says, so basically mankind develops hierarchies in order to have a functioning society. They make up categories in value and distinction. So this kind of sounds almost like Nietzsche, right? They also come up with a anointed king or prince who has the monopoly of violence. So here he sounds like a libertarian. They place this right of justice and violence in this single ruler, and then we get the investiture of violence. Then violence gets managed by also the priest class. So the priest class rises is very Nietzschean. The priest class also kind of competes with or synthesizes with, synergizes with the prince. He calls this prince, priest and prince and priest here. And we're not talking about Prince like Purple Rain. Purple rain, purple rain. Purple Rain, R-E-I-G-N. Oh, get it? Prince and priest? Get it? Purple Rain. I'll make it rain underneath my rain. Elect me and you'll be rich. I'll make it rain underneath my purple rain. By the way, if you would hit like and share, welcome everybody. Then he says, the priest class was also perceptive in that an orderly society, he seems to say they made it up, needed the idea of sacrifice. We need sacrifice and scapegoats. Scapegoats might be the sinner, the enemy tribes, whoever. The problem of the society is the scapegoat. He says, really, this is all mythology that the priests repeat to control society. The notion of the sacred then is intimately tied into this power structure that brings order to violence to control society. Ever since the first sedentary social forms, perhaps say 10,000 years ago, there have been three ways to control man's violence: the religious control, the military control, and the economic control. The first, the religious, mediates man's relationship with nature and the fact of his death. The second, the relationship between the social forms, that is, the military. And the third, the economic, with each of the social forms. These three ways control violence and thus define the order, corresponding to various types of social forms or social structures. These orders, which can in turn be called the orders of sacred, force, and money. Sacred, force, and money. The three key elements here. Multiple forms of order and sacred continue up into the present day as well. However, the modern forms have seen religious power displaced by the political and the economic. So political economy has replaced the religious power. Thus, today we essentially have no sacred. The sacred has no power, but without the sacred, there is no power, and so other entities are actually invested with sacred power. He says if you go back to ancient worldviews, these were all integrated. For example, all of life was divine, part of the divine mythos, a manifestation of the divine. For example, animism, you saw every object has a spirit that indwells it. The eating of flesh and animals, and perhaps even cannibalism, was part of this perpetual cycle of nature. This is a very Foucault, very Nietzsche type analysis. Everything was seen and subsumed under the order of the sacred in a unified holistic worldview. Thus, nothing, whether it's birth, death, art, or life, is not a part of this worldview. Today, we've moved away from that worldview where animism, he's just calling animism any kind of religious worldview that sees everything as in some sense related to or owned by the divine or sacred. Now, the sacred has been replaced with products. I'd say that's true. So now we've moved away from animism to where sacred objects are now consumable products. And he says this is a natural outworking of the rule of money. Once we transition to the money power in modernity, post-capitalism, he's saying, then we no longer see these things as sacred because they're not in any sense related to a transcendent. They only have the human horizontal plane relative value insofar as they're useful to humans. Thus, no transcendent here. Doesn't mean that there can't be. It's just saying that this is the attitude, the modus operandi of the system. That's all he's saying. He says, thus, capitalism gives rise to efficiency, immediacy, and streamlining, or the Burnham type stuff, managerial elite, etc. Taylorism. He says we can look back, in fact, to market forms. Capitalism is the ninth form. I don't know where he came up with. He just sort of came up with these forms. He says there's 9 forms, and we're in the 9th, and he's going to list these in a minute. At the center of each of these forms or phases is a dominant city-state. And these city-states are ruled by elites that define the ideology of the city-state. In fact, religious revolutions are oftentimes a determining factor in the power structure of these elite city-states. Now, notice, this is one of the global elite telling you that the global elite rule from city-states. Is he a conspiracy theorist? No, he's one of the global elite. He's the Kissinger of France, telling you what I say. Each market form uses technology that is more efficient than the predecessors in utilizing energy and organizing communication. A form is stable in so long as it creates enough wealth to maintain the demand for its products. When it begins to falter or is hampered this market form weakens and gives way to the next. Thus, there's an intimate connection between money, power, and tech. Then he says, the newest form that comes when a new form organizes will be a new center. When technology here and social relations allow for competing businesses on the market to replace non-market services by a new mass product object, the market will then obey and new added value. Mark Carney, $1. I work in cybersecurity. I know Bitcoin is auditable and traceable. Yeah, I'm aware of the public ledger. And he says it is not a good currency. It is a good store of wealth. I understand that. But you can have the something else that's a layer 2, or you can have something else that's a stable coin, or the dollar can continue to exist but be backed by something like Bitcoin. So it doesn't have to be the day-to-day thing itself. It can just be the backing for whatever the day-to-day thing is, a digital dollar or something like that. So I'm aware of that. But also the fact that it's decentralized and that it's a public ledger, it means that it is auditable and traceable in the sense of like bad actors. But also a lot of these entities that would do this, right, they might not be here in 10 or 15 years or 20 years. The 8 forms. I'm sorry, I missed Philip Edenhorn. This is the top 10 global elite streams. Thank you. This one, or you mean that you want a top 10 global elite? MG sends $3 and says, I just want to hear that sweet song. Yeah, exactly. Let's hear it. Ready? Next up is the 8 forms. After the song. From the 13th century to now, 8 successive forms have emerged. Again, I have no idea where he gets... I guess he's just picking the 8 most powerful city-states from 1300. Why he picks 1300, I don't know. Bruges, 1300. Venice, 1450. Antwerp, 1500. Genoa, 1550. Amsterdam, 1650. London, 1750. Boston retarded, 1880. And New York, 1930. So basically saying that we're kind of at the end of the New York Wall Street dollar dominance era. As technology progresses and is invented, production improves and society is able to then cut the cost of goods and services. And whoever is better at that becomes the new center of power of the city-states. Notice that he doesn't say it's nation-states. It's these powerful city centers. New York, London, etc. He says each time there's a new form, it reduces the power of the family in the previous form. Interesting. A world economy always has an urban center of gravity, a city that is the logistics and heart of this activity. Dominant cities do not dominate forever. They are eventually replaced by another. And what determines that? Apparently it is tech. The essential question must be answered. Well, who decides what region or city becomes the center? A city becomes the center when its constellation of industrial and political elites organize themselves around a cultural project and harness the resources to develop new technologies for faster and better means. This is going to be a key element, I believe, in determining who will have power in the future. The new petrodollar is a CBDC. None of that's going to work. I mean, a CBDC that they put out is just going to be it's going to be an electronic fiat. How is that going to be any better? An electronic fiat will probably be worse than a physical fiat. This is not fiat. It's the opposite of that. Now, listen to this. What is the form that rules where we are now? Well, where we are now in this New York, post-New York 1930s era, get this. Material abundance and geographical advantage rarely amount to what makes for the key city center. So what is it then that allows for certain cities to arise? It's not the answer I expected. You might think, well, physical location or material abundance. And he's saying, no, it's not actually that. This is his thesis. What allows a certain region or city to arise to become one of these key centers is rather that it avoids becoming entangled in wars. Foreign entanglements bleed the rivals and allows the city that doesn't get involved to become the center. Isn't it interesting that what allowed America to become what it was, the world power? Non-interventionism, not becoming entangled in all these wars, which drains and destroys the country to prop up this ridiculous form of imperialism is the only way to put it. And by the way, it is that. Brzezinski calls it the American Empire. That, by the way, was all designed by the CFR. The CFRs who decided to turn America away from a protectionist, non-interventionist power into a global police, international interventionist power. The CFR achieved that in the 1920s. That transition, that was their key function under Rockefeller and other oligarchs, and that's why we're in this situation that we're in. The Second World War was the midwife of the New York dominant Wall Street market form. The desire of families and homemaking, of families for homemaking durables was met by this Keynesian New Deal social spending policy of the post-war period. And what is Keynesianism? Fabian socialist economics. Milton Keynes was a Fabian. All of the institutions post-World War II that were set up, you might think, were they communist? Were they capitalist? No, dummies. They're both. It's called Fabian socialism, which is the merger of monopoly capital and communism, known as reformed Marxism or Fabian socialism. And literally all of the post-World War II institutions that exist now today, the IMF, the World Bank, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they are Keynesian institutions. That's the world that we live under. In fact, there's a whole list of these institutions in the book. And that's because all of these British elites that set this up were all part of this same structure. The Royal Institute for International Affairs was created under the leadership of Lionel Curtis and was structured by Fabians like R.H. Tawney, John Maynard Keynes, Philip Noel Barker, as well as Fabian collaborators and synthesizers like the London School of Economics professor Arnold Toynbee, who became the director of Chatham House. Thus, all of these institutions that were set up, League of Nations, United Nations, RIIA, CFR, Socialist League, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Aspen Institute, World Council of Churches, NATO, Bilderberg, they're literally all set up by Fabian socialists. It's not even that hard to figure this out. It's not even like controversial. And that book is way better and more modern and updated. This is just the older version of this history. And people are all confused about this because they think that it's like classical Marxism. It's not classical Marxism, okay? It's not anti-capital. It's Marxism that's pro-capital and allied with it. And Attali admits that, yes, that is the structure of the existing order. Now he says that the competition And I guess that's why he has this weird woodcut. I mean, it looks like a Dyer. I don't know what it is. But this is like two guys competing, so I guess this is about competition. Now, this next chapter is where he gets things wrong. There's a couple insights in the chapter, though, because he says, for example, the very beginning, that our system is based on pluralism. That is the system of liberal markets, democratic, open liberal markets. It requires pluralism. He says we could describe this as a pyramid with two pillars. I kid you not. This is his Masonic terminology. He says the world structure is like a pyramid with two pillars. Oh, I'm sorry, Jacques Attali. Are you an idiot conspiracy theorist? Because anyone else were to say this, they would be immediately deemed as an idiot conspiracy theorist. Yet when you say it, using your obvious Masonic imagery, and by the way, Grand Orient Freemasonry has always been very powerful in France, and most of its leaders and presidents are members of the Grand Orient Lodge, etc. He says the world order in the Cold War can be described as a pyramid with two pillars. The pyramid is the shape that is taken by the eighth market form, which is the dollar. It is the petrodollar, the universal international currency that presently rules. And the two pillars are the maintenance of the dialectics of global order of the U.S. and the USSR. However, this one pillar of the USSR has just collapsed. This will now give America the opportunity to become the center again. Then he says there's two competitors to America that might displace America as the center. He says those competitors, and this is where he's wrong. These competitors for the next few decades will be Japan and the EU. Okay, well, that didn't happen. In fact, 4 years after this book, Japan's economy collapsed into what's called the lost decades. Over the period of 1995 to 2023, Japan's GDP fell from 5 trillion to 4 trillion. Real wages fell 11%. The lost decade. So perhaps Americanists understood the threat of Japan. And I remember in the 90s, there were these books that were coming out. There were books coming out about the rise of Japan, the threat of Japanese, economy to the West and whatever. But whatever happened, however this occurred, I don't know all the details of this. Enough happened such that Japan was definitely emasculated and cucked into being essentially unable to have population below replacement population levels. And I guess essentially the toxic culture that was exported was enough to do this. I don't know exactly. I don't know enough about Japanese geopolitics to say. But he says that the other competitor would be the EU. That didn't work. The EU has not become a competitor to America. So exactly where that's going to go, I don't know. However, he says that the dream of the EU in 1991 would perhaps be that it could step forward to become a competitor. Unfortunately, it turns out, as even Attali says, just like Japan, Europe's replacement population levels are not enough to even give it that status anymore. And he's writing prior to all of the non-Europeans suddenly entering Europe in the past 20 years. So Attali got all of that very wrong. However, he was perceptive enough to realize that population displacement is more than sufficient to erode the nation state, combined with the power of the nomadic device, which severs from one's heritage, family, tradition, etc. So that's the first half of the very insightful geopolitical text from Jacques Attali, the book Millennium. It's a very quick read. It's only 100 pages. And so in the next couple days, I will have the part 2 up. I want a reminder to you guys that I did get part 2 of the Sexpionage history book up. That book is complete. You can watch the part 2 over here on Rockfin, or you can subscribe at Jay's Analysis to get access to the archives of the last 10 years of deep geopolitical analysis, theology, book reports, book reviews, analyses, etc., debates, lectures, the rest of the Global Elite book series. You can get all that in the archives at Jay's Analysis for $4.95 a month, $60 a year. You subscribe in the show description at the links, or you can subscribe to the same material over here on Rockfin. Rockfin is a great free speech-based platform. Either way has its advantages. Not everything is over on Rockfin. Makes it very easy. However, not everything in the last 10 years of my work is over on Rockfin. A lot of it is, but still not everything. It takes a long time to get it all over there. So I'd say about 70% of it is over there. We got a nice, sizable audience over there on X. Thank you guys for watching live over there. That's the first time we've multi-streamed. I can't believe it all worked. We multi-streamed over on Twitch too. I have an old Twitch channel that I resurrected. Guys, if you would hit like and share. Remember to get tickets to our event. Also, I have a show sponsor, and that is Chalk.com. If you head on over to Chalk.com, you can use the promo code J44Life to get access to the best in supplementation that's out there. They have a super stringent process for making sure that their products are pure. They derive a lot of these from the Amazon. It's a very serious red pill based company. Chalk.com is the best when it comes to all of these products. You can get the male vitality stack that pops up right away. If you see this right here, the performance stack, you get the Chad mode. And yes, it actually has the Chad meme dude right there. You do not pay that full amount. You pay a discounted amount, much better than 15% off. You pay the discount. I don't know why this website's acting weird. There we go. You pay 44% off of that 174 if you want to get the performance side. But you can also buy individual products. You just sign up for J44Life. That's JAY44LIFE. And you will get that coming every month. And I guarantee you're going to want Chalk coming on a monthly basis. It's not just for dudes, though. There's also products for ladies. Ladies, if you want, ashwagandha, that's great for regulating your moods. If you have these kind of female mood swings. I don't know if you know that, but ladies do have female mood swings, especially if they are dealing with the estrogens. There's also the Irish moss, which is good for that. There's also the 7 Wonders, which is great for mineral deficiencies. So get all those products over at chalk.com, CHOQ.com. Also, there's the ladies stack. You don't have to get, it's not just men's stuff. There's also female vitality right here, female vitality stack. Make use of those promo codes to get that great discount. And you can cancel at any time. So although you are subscribing, if you ever need to cancel, it's very easy to do that. You can cancel at any time over at chalk.com. Remember to get tickets to our live event over at Eventbrite. Otherwise, I will see you